The topic I am covering is the recent policy of family separation of migrants at the U.S. southern border. Some background to start. It is difficult to determine when the separations began or even how many children are currently in the system. The estimated number of children since October is 700, but in the past month that has increased by the hundreds, possibly even doubled. The Florence Center for Immigration and Refugee Rights reports that they have seen 100 new cases of unaccompanied minors in the past 12 days. As of yesterday, in the past 2 weeks, and I quote the New York Times, 638 parents who arrived with 658 children have been prosecuted. And again, that's been in the last 2 weeks. First, what is an unaccompanied minor? There are cases of people under 18 crossing the border without an accompanying adult. In this situation, if found, they are put into a detention facility run by Border Protection agents. We are assuming that this is the path our quote-unquote unaccompanied minors are taking. Within 72 hours, they are supposed to be housed in temporary shelters. Each child is assigned a caseworker and given mental and physical health assessments and screenings. They are then assigned to a sponsor. Oftentimes this can be a wait, in which case they are still in the temporary shelter. Many of the children who come by themselves already have a name and contact information for someone, often a family member over 18, who will become their sponsor. The sponsors are subjected to background checks before the child is released into their custody, while their case for asylum is determined through the court system. The recent upsurge of, quote, unaccompanied minors, unquote, is due to a new policy to criminally prosecute those who enter the U.S. illegally. The parents are held and processed by Immigration and Customs Enforcement. The children are taken away because their parents are being jailed, and we do not have the appropriate facilities to house them together. Children are being held in various centers throughout the country. The Eloy Detention Center is one such. I have not been able to get much information except that no direct phone calls are allowed. The implication being that however long the children are being held there, they have no way to even speak to anyone they know. There's another center in Arizona that is reportedly caring for over 60 children as young as 12 months to 10 years. Senator Jeff Merkley was recently in the news because he requested entry into a holding center in Texas to determine conditions, and he was denied entry. It is currently impossible to determine the conditions under which these children are being held. Some of them are in centers, including the preparations being made on military bases to house them there. Some are in shelters, and some are being placed in the foster care system. The separations thus far reported are lasting anywhere from 10 days to 4 months to 7. I mentioned earlier that parents are being held through ICE. The children are being held through the Office of Refugee Resettlement, so parents and children can and have gone months, long distances apart, and in some verified cases, weeks without any contact. These separations are likely to have far-reaching impacts for these children and possibly beyond. Now I'm looking at the implications for child development, particularly through the lens of attachment theory. What is attachment theory? An attachment is the relationship between an infant or child and his or her caregiver. A responsible caregiver shows the infant that their needs will be met and that the caregiver is what our text calls a safe haven. Also that they are safe, or that the caregiver is what our text calls a secure base from which to explore the world. There are several stages of a secure attachment. I'm going to focus on the stages that are currently being disrupted under the separation practice. Between 6 to 18 months, infants are showing a clear-cut attachment. They tend to stay closer to their caregivers, reach out to them for comforting and support, as well as protesting when they are separated. For the following 6 months, the child-caregiver relationship changes to a more reciprocal relationship in which the child, aged 18 months to 2 years, takes a bit more control through their use of language development and their ability to understand patterns and routine. They are able to work on taking turns with speech and in some cases following directions. In early childhood, children are learning to accept more than one attachment caregiver. They still rely on familiar people when they are in distress. Trust is important during this time, that needs will still be met, as well as that explorations and experiments are safe. Middle childhood and adolescence are still based on the secure attachment from infancy and through childhood. As children become more focused on peers and outside groups, they are still holding on to the bonds with their caregivers. There are different kinds of attachment. Secure attachment is the ideal, where the child-caregiver relationship is comforting, encouraging, and provides for the child's needs, emotional and physical. There is also insecure avoidant attachment, where children seem uncaring about where their caregiver is or what they are doing. They tend to interact with at least toys as in infancy on a more superficial level. Insecure resistant attachment is when infants seem overly worried about their caregiver and are not consoled when they are reunited with them. On a more serious disordered level is disorganized and disoriented attachment. According to our text, these infants can appear calm one moment and without any stimulus, scared or angry the next. Some infants can also demonstrate no attachment behaviors, acting afraid of their caregivers. Qualities outlined by our text of a sensitive caregiver include consistent responses to a child's needs and preferences, regular expression of affection, and openness to infant-directed interaction. Our textbook says when children when children are separated from a primary caregiver, determine the types of extra intercession they need. It counsels caregivers to watch for signs of a traumatic reaction and recommend intervention if children are truly suffering. It also strongly urges that people should advocate for stability in employed caregivers and encourage multiple attachments. As I have said, it is not currently possible to determine the conditions the separated children are being exposed to. There are no mandates for advocates or services or even for adult-to-child ratios. Children who are raised in institutional settings see issues such as stunted growth, cognitive impairments, increases in anxiety and in stress-related diseases like obesity, cardiac problems, and diabetes, to name a few. Children who have had multiple foster care placements with different caregivers have a higher school dropout rate, higher unemployment rates, as well as higher rates of both physical and mental disorders. There are some theories out there in epigenetic research that say that trauma can be passed down to survivors' future children. Epigenetics is the study of gene expression. We know that not all genes are active all the time. Epigenetics looks at why and how some genes are suppressed and others expressed. There is irreparable harm being done right now, not just to today's parents and children, but possibly for generations to come. There are currently fundraisers to assist the non-governmental organizations working as advocates. There are lawmakers working to get access to the facilities to assess conditions, and there is a suit brought by the ACLU to work on challenging the current separation policy.